There is one thing about Balmoral that should not feel possible. On the morning of 31 August 1997, 15-year-old Prince William woke inside that castle and learned that his mother was gone.
I was in Balmoral when I was told that my mother had died.
The story now returns him to the same house on 25 August 2026, 6 days before the 29th anniversary, preparing to speak about Diana, and suddenly unable to finish one sentence. Same place, same week, 29 years apart. And the sentence that stops him is not about Paris, the funeral, or the cameras. It is about something Diana told him before any of that happened. And the final meaning of that warning is not what anyone first expects. That is the detail sitting underneath this entire story. By 5:55 that Tuesday evening, William and Catherine have already been at Balmoral for several days with George, Charlotte, and Louis. The estate still looks normal. Dogs cross the lawns, staff move quietly through the house, the children come and go. Nothing outside announces that 31 August is approaching. But for William, late August has never been an ordinary stretch of the calendar. Balmoral is where childhood split into a before and an after. Earlier that afternoon, one of William's aides asks whether he will record a short remembrance message ahead of the anniversary. Nothing grand, no national address. No ceremony, just a few restrained thoughts about his mother, her legacy, and what has stayed with him across nearly 3 decades. William agrees. At 6:18 p.m., a small drawing room is ready. A chair, soft light from the window, a glass of water, a neutral background. William wears a dark jacket and muted tie. The plan seems simple. He will speak about Diana's warmth, the way she connected with people, and the lessons he still carries. The first part comes easily. Then the aide reaches the final prompt. What is the one thing his mother taught him that he has never forgotten? William looks down. For several seconds, nobody moves. He tries to begin, stops, takes the small white handkerchief in his hand and touches the corner of one eye. Then he says the line that changes the entire recording. There was one thing she said to me that I never forgot. And then he stops again. That should have been the answer. It was not. Because when William finally explains what Diana said, the memory does not lead where most people expect. It does not begin with the funeral. It does not begin with Charles. It does not begin with the palace. It begins with Harry. And before this story moves one step further, there is something worth asking every person who still says Diana mattered. Do you believe Diana could already see what royal life might one day do to William and Harry before those two boys were old enough to understand it themselves? If you do not just sit quietly and disappear when the video ends. Type, "We remember Diana," in the comments so everyone watching can see where you stand. Like this video, share it with somebody who still remembers her, and subscribe to the channel. Because 29 years later, Diana should mean more than one photograph every August and a few headlines that vanish the following morning. If people who still care about her will not take a few seconds to keep these stories alive, who will? Let the comments speak together tonight. We remember Diana. The aide asks whether William wants a few minutes. He nods. No speech, no performance. He simply stands, leaves the room, and moves toward the quieter side of the house. That matters, because the warning has been sitting inside him for 29 years. But the thing that brings it back that evening is not a camera. It is George. At 6:42 p.m., William steps outside toward the grounds. George is nearby, slightly apart from the others for a moment. He is 13 now, old enough to notice when adults say they are fine, and clearly are not. Old enough to know what late August means to his father. George asks if he is all right. William says yes. Then he corrects himself. Not really. George hesitates before asking the question that opens the door William has just closed in the drawing room. Is this because of Granny Diana? William looks at him and says yes. And suddenly the story is no longer about a prince remembering his mother. It is about a father looking at a 13-year-old boy while remembering what Diana once feared could happen to two brothers raised inside the same institution. That is where the warning begins to change. Because Diana had not given William some sweeping prophecy about the crown, she had noticed something smaller and more dangerous because of how ordinary it looked. One son already had a role the world understood, the other did not. William could not have known at 15 how much weight that difference might carry. Standing with George at Balmoral, nearly 3 decades later, the memory now sounds different. But to understand why, the story has to go back 9 days before Diana died. Kensington Palace, Friday, 22 August 1997, late afternoon, and one sentence from a mother who was watching both her sons more closely than either of them realized. The date looks perfect on paper. Friday, 22 August 1997. Kensington Palace, 9 days before Diana died. It sounds like the kind of afternoon on which a mother could have pulled her eldest son aside and left him with one final warning. Except the record creates a problem. Diana was not sitting inside Kensington Palace with William that afternoon. By 22 August, William and Harry were spending the summer at Balmoral, while Diana had left England for the south of France to rejoin Dodi Fayed. That correction matters because the warning did not need one final meeting on that afternoon to become powerful. The more unsettling version is that Diana had been worrying about the same thing for years. Her 2 sons were growing up together, but they were never being prepared for the same future. William had known from childhood what waited for him. There would be preparation, expectation, constitutional duty, and eventually the crown. Harry's future was harder to define. While they were boys, the old royal shorthand followed them everywhere, the heir and the spare. Diana understood the weight of that distinction. Andrew Morton later wrote that she was acutely aware of the burden of raising 2 boys under those labels. She tried to expose both of them to ordinary life beyond palace walls, but William carried an extra pressure because everybody knew what he was expected to become. Harry, by contrast, would grow up beside the future king while having to discover a purpose for himself. That was the fault line. And there is an account, published years later by royal historian Robert Lacey, that gives Diana's fear a more personal shape. Diana's friend Simone Simmons remembered the princess making William and Harry promise that they would remain each other's best friends and never allow another person to come between them. No prediction, no secret about Paris, no warning about some hidden enemy. A mother telling 2 brothers not to lose each other. That distinction is everything. Because Diana had watched William become unusually serious for his age. She had described him as a deep thinker. He was the boy who absorbed tension, asked questions, and understood more than adults sometimes realized. When Charles and Diana separated, Diana later said she explained the situation to William gently because she knew he thought deeply about what was happening around him. Harry was different, younger, more outwardly restless, less burdened, at least on the surface, by the future waiting for his brother. But Diana did not treat that difference as permission for the boys to drift apart. She pushed connection, she pushed loyalty, and she understood that royal hierarchy could enter a family long before either child had the language to describe what it was doing. There is another detail worth holding on to. Diana once explained that when William was still young, he told her he wanted to become a policeman so he could protect her. Harry immediately reminded him that he could not, because he had to become king. It sounds like a funny exchange between children. Look closer. Harry already knew William belonged to something larger. William already knew it too. The crown had entered the room before either boy had finished growing up. Years later, Harry would describe his own childhood through that same division. William was the heir, Harry was the backup. Whatever anyone thinks of the choices both men made as adults, the distinction itself was real, and Diana had recognized its emotional danger while they were still children. That is what makes her warning so difficult to dismiss. She was not asking William to save Harry from every mistake. She was not asking Harry to live permanently in William's shadow. The point was simpler. Whatever happened around them, Brotherhood had to remain stronger than the roles being assigned to them. And then came the summer of 1997. By late August, Diana and her sons were apart. William and Harry were at Balmoral. Diana was travelling abroad. Their contact continued by telephone. Nothing about that arrangement suggested that time was running out. On 30th August, Diana called Balmoral from Paris. The boys were playing with their cousins. They were having fun. The telephone was an interruption, not an omen. William later remembered being in a hurry to return to what he had been doing. Harry remembered the same impatience. Neither boy knew it would be the final time they heard her voice. William has never publicly revealed everything Diana said during that call. He has said that he remembers. That is enough to make the silence matter. Because only hours later, the promise about staying together would stop sounding like a mother's ordinary concern. It would become an instruction two grieving brothers had no mother left to repeat. And before that Sunday morning was over, William would discover something else. When tragedy entered Balmoral, the world did look to the older brother first. Sunday, the 31st August 1997, began at Balmoral without the sound of crowds, cameras, or the public mourning that would soon consume Britain. The castle was quiet. William was 15, Harry was 12. Their mother was hundreds of miles away in Paris, and when the first calls reached Scotland, the boys were still asleep. The adults knew first. That alone changed the atmosphere inside the house. Prince Charles was told during the night. The Queen and Prince Philip were there. Decisions had to be made quickly, but one of them came before everything else. William and Harry had to be told that Diana was gone. There was no way to soften it enough. Years later, William would say that Balmoral was where he was told his mother had died. He did not describe some dramatic scene, he described shock, the kind that makes time feel wrong, rooms feel unfamiliar, and ordinary questions suddenly impossible to answer.
Losing someone so close to you is utterly devastating, especially at that age.
That morning, the family went to Crathy Kirk. William later said he found sanctuary in that service. The phrase matters because outside Balmoral, something enormous was already beginning. News was spreading across Britain. People were waking to television bulletins. Flowers were appearing. Reporters were moving toward Kensington Palace, Buckingham Palace, and Scotland. Inside Balmoral, William and Harry were being kept away from most of it. The adults around them were trying to protect two children. But protection created its own strange silence. There were no crowds in front of William, no wall of flowers, no endless television pictures showing the scale of what had happened. For several hours, grief remained private. A mother was missing. Two sons were trying to understand that she was not coming back. And then the roles began to return. William was not only Diana's eldest child, he was second in line to the throne. Even at 15, people understood what his future was supposed to be. Harry was his younger brother, grieving the same mother, but carrying a different place in the royal structure. Nobody needed to announce that difference. It was there. That is where Diana's old concern about keeping the brothers close begins to feel less sentimental. In childhood, being the heir could sound like a title. On that Sunday morning, it became pressure. William was the older one, the one expected to absorb more, the one the world would naturally study first. And Harry was watching him. That does not mean William suddenly became responsible for his brother's grief. No child should have carried that burden. It means the two boys were entering the worst week of their lives while the hierarchy around them remained intact. The monarchy did not disappear because their mother had. If anyone watching still remembers seeing William and Harry that week and thinking they looked far too young for what was being asked of them, this is the moment to say it. Like this video, share it with someone who remembers Diana, and subscribe before this story moves on. Then write, "We stood with the boys" in the comments. Because millions remember the funeral. Far fewer stopped to remember that, before they became symbols on a television screen, they were simply two children who had lost their mother. By the afternoon, the private world at Balmoral and the public world outside it were moving in opposite directions. Britain wanted to mourn together. The family wanted to give William and Harry room. That tension would define the next several days. The Queen remained at Balmoral with the boys. Charles travelled to Paris to accompany Diana's body back to Britain. Outside the palace gates, grief grew larger by the hour. Flowers covered pavements. Messages arrived. The absence of the royal family from London began attracting questions. But inside Scotland, another question was forming. What would happen at the funeral? A ceremonial funeral for Diana would not be a private goodbye. It would be watched by millions. Every movement would be photographed, every expression interpreted, and at the center of the discussion were two boys whose grief had already become part of a national story. The most difficult question concerned the procession. Should William and Harry walk behind their mother's coffin? There was no simple answer. To the public, the image might represent courage, duty, and respect. To a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old, it meant walking through London under the gaze of the world during the most personal week imaginable. William did not immediately want that. Accounts of the discussions differ in smaller details, but one fact has endured. Prince Philip became central to persuading him. That matters for a reason nobody could see yet. Philip had spent decades walking 2 steps behind the sovereign, understanding what public duty could demand from a private person. Now the question was not about protocol. It was about a grandson. And before William finally agreed to take that walk, Philip would put the decision to him in a form that changed everything. Not an order, not a command from the crown, a question. A question that meant William would not have to walk alone. Saturday, 6 September 1997. London was unrecognizable. For nearly a week, the city had been filling with flowers, handwritten notes, photographs, and people who had never met Diana but felt they had lost someone they knew. By the morning of the funeral, the private grief of 2 boys had become a national event. William was 15, Harry was 12, and now came the walk. The decision had not been simple. William had resisted joining the procession. He did not want to become part of a public spectacle while trying to understand the loss of his mother. Prince Philip understood enough of that hesitation to change the question. He did not tell William that duty required it. He asked whether William would walk if he walked too. That was different. Philip would later be remembered as one of the figures beside the boys that day, walking with Charles and Diana's brother, Earl Spencer. But the importance of his presence was not ceremonial. It gave William something that mattered more than ceremony. Company. The procession began at Kensington Palace and moved through London toward Westminster Abbey. Diana's coffin travelled ahead. Behind it came 5 men whose relationships to her could not have been more different. Charles, Philip, William, Harry, Charles Spencer. Millions saw a royal procession. William experienced something else. He was walking beside the younger brother Diana had spent years trying to keep close to him. There was no speech between the brothers that could make the moment easier, no gesture large enough to change what had happened. They simply kept moving, step after step. That is where Diana's concern about her sons takes on its strongest meaning. Not because William could protect Harry from grief. He could not. Not because either boy could understand what the coming years would do to them. They could not. But on that road, one thing remained within William's control. Harry did not walk it by himself. And there is a painful symmetry in the man beside them. Philip had entered the royal family from the outside and spent decades learning what happened when personal feeling collided with institutional expectation. Now, at 76, he placed himself inside one of the most exposed moments of his grandson's lives, so William would not have to face it without an older hand nearby. One generation stood beside the next. Then the cameras captured it forever. That image became history so quickly that it is easy to forget the human sequence underneath it. The boys were not walking toward a future they understood. They were walking through a day adults had organized around them, trying to behave in a way the world would accept. And when the funeral ended, The cameras did not stop caring about the brothers. They simply changed subjects. School, military service, relationships, marriage, duty. Every new stage invited comparison. William was measured against the future crown. Harry was measured against William. That distinction followed them into adulthood. At first, the closeness between the brothers appeared to survive it. They worked together, they joked together in public, they supported causes connected to Diana. For years, Britain saw two sons shaped by the same loss and held together by it. But shared grief is not the same thing as a guarantee. Time began exposing the difference Diana had worried about. William's path narrowed as responsibility increased. Marriage, children, and preparation for kingship pushed him deeper into the institution he had been born to inherit. Harry's path moved differently. Military service gave him purpose. Public work followed. Then marriage changed the shape of his life again. Eventually came the departure from full-time royal duties, the move abroad, interviews, accusations, and a family dispute that no longer stayed behind palace doors. The two boys who once walked shoulder to shoulder were now being discussed as opposing sides. That is what makes Diana's old concern difficult to hear without wondering what she would have thought. Did William fail her? That question is too easy. So is blaming Harry for everything that followed. Families rarely break through one moment. They separate through accumulated injuries, incompatible expectations, pride, distance, pressure, and conversations that arrive too late. The tragedy is not that Diana predicted every detail. She did not. The tragedy is that she understood the weakness in the structure before her sons were old enough to see it. If that distinction still matters, this is where viewers should make themselves heard. Like the video, share it with someone who remembers those two boys walking together, and subscribe. Then leave the words "Keep brothers together" below, because whatever anyone thinks of William or Harry today, Diana's deepest hope was never that one son should defeat the other. And then, 3 decades after that procession, William found himself back at Balmoral, facing a sight that changed the warning again. George was 13. Louis was 8. One boy had been born into a future everyone understood. The other had not. William looked at them, and for the first time, the pattern was no longer behind him. It was standing in front of him. By 7:10 that evening, the mood inside Balmoral had changed again. The recording room had been left behind. No camera, no prepared remarks, no aide waiting for William to find the right sentence. Catherine had suggested that the rest of the evening remain simple, and for once there was nothing more useful than that. Family. George, Charlotte, and Louis gathered in one of the quieter rooms of the house while the light outside began to fade. It was not a formal conversation. That was precisely why it mattered. George had already seen enough to know his father had been carrying something heavy. He asked the question again. What had Diana actually said? William did not answer immediately. For nearly 3 decades, that memory had belonged to another part of his life, sealed inside a period when he had been a boy trying to understand why the world had changed. Now 3 children were sitting in front of him, and suddenly the memory had a different audience. He told them that Diana had always worried about the way royal life could divide people before they even noticed it happening. William was the heir. Harry was not. That difference sounded simple when they were children. One would inherit responsibility, the other would have more freedom. But Diana had understood something harder. Freedom can become uncertainty, responsibility can become distance. And once a family starts treating 2 brothers according to different futures, those futures can begin shaping the relationship itself. George listened closely. Charlotte watched William. Louis understood only part of it, but he understood the emotion. Then William explained the part that had stayed with him. Diana wanted her sons to remain close. Whatever happened around them, whatever titles came later, whatever the institution expected, she did not want one brother to feel that the other had disappeared into a role. That was the warning beneath everything. Not a prediction, a fear. And Catherine saw the moment William's eyes moved from George to Louis. That glance changed the room. George was 13. He was already growing into a position the country understood. One day, more attention would fall on him simply because of where he stood in the line of succession. Louis was 8. Different expectations would follow him. Different comparisons. Different assumptions. William did not need anybody to explain what that could become. He had lived it. Catherine finally broke the silence. She said Diana may not only have feared losing her sons to royal life, she may have feared royal life would make them lose each other. William looked at her. That sentence landed harder than anything said in the recording room, because it removed the easy interpretation. For years, William could tell himself that the warning stayed with him because of 1997, because of the final phone call, because of Balmoral, because of the funeral procession and the sight of Harry beside him. But what if that was only the beginning? What if the warning stayed because adulthood kept proving how difficult it was to protect a relationship from the roles built around it? That question carried no simple villain. It did not erase Harry's choices. It did not erase William's. It did not turn Diana into someone who could see the future. It simply gave her concern a terrible durability. If viewers believe Diana's greatest legacy was the bond she wanted her sons to keep, this is the moment to say it. Like this video, share it with someone who remembers those boys together, and subscribe. Write Diana wanted them together in the comments, because choosing sides was never the promise their mother wanted from them. Charlotte then asked the question that made the room go quiet. Did Diana know this would happen? William's answer was simple: no. His mother had not known how the next 29 years would unfold. She had not known where Harry would live, what William would become, or how public their disagreements would one day be. She knew her sons. That was enough. And now William was looking at his own children with the advantage Diana never received. He knew what the pattern looked like after it had already happened once. He could not control every headline George would face. He could not decide what people would one day expect from Louis. He could not remove the hierarchy they had been born into. But inside the family, he could make one decision differently. That was when William finally understood why the warning had survived every other memory from that summer. The funeral had made him remember the words. What came afterward had taught him what they meant. And before the night was over, he would return to the unfinished recording with an answer very different from the one his aide had expected. Later that night, William returned to the room he had left unfinished. The house was quieter. The first attempt had been about memory. This one was about meaning. He sat down again and did not begin with the funeral. He began with what Diana had understood about children. Some children are handed a future before they can choose it. Others grow up beside that future and spend years working out where they fit. In a royal family, those differences are announced in titles, expectation, and duty. William had spent most of his life on one side of that divide. Harry had spent his on the other. That was the part Diana had worried about. Not whether her sons would argue, brothers argue. Not whether adulthood would pull them in different directions. Families change. Her fear was more basic. She did not want the structure around them to become stronger than the bond between them. 29 years later, William could fully see why that thought had never left him. For years he connected it to 1 week. The call from Paris. The morning at Balmoral. The funeral. The walk through London. But grief was only where the warning became permanent. Life was where it became clear. William grew into the role everybody had expected. Harry searched for a different kind of life, inside and eventually outside the institution. The brothers made choices. They hurt each other. They carried versions of the same childhood that did not always sound like the same childhood anymore. And underneath all of that remained the thing Diana had feared. 2 boys could love each other and still be pulled into different worlds. That is the part William could not solve by becoming king. A crown cannot repair a relationship. A title cannot make two brothers understand the same memory. Duty cannot force closeness. That realization changed the answer he had been trying to record. Diana's lesson was not simply that family mattered. Her deeper lesson was that family has to be protected before the pressures around it become normal enough to stop noticing. That is why George and Louis mattered. William could not rewrite his childhood. He could not return to 1997 and answer the telephone differently. He could not undo the years when he and Harry began seeing the same institution from opposite sides. But he could recognize the pattern sooner with his own children. George would grow up with expectations that became more visible each year. Louis would grow up beside him. Charlotte would occupy her own position between them, with pressures of her own. None of those children had chosen the order into which they were born. That was the inheritance William could manage differently, not the succession, the relationship. And that was the final turn. The warning was never really about Harry alone. It was about what happens when a family begins confusing role with identity. William had spent years learning how easily the two could become tangled. The future king becomes the responsible one. The younger brother becomes the free one. Then the responsible one is expected to absorb more. The free one is expected to need less. Diana saw the beginning of that danger. William lived through the rest. So when the recording resumed, the emotion was different. The grief remained, but it no longer controlled the room. The memory had become instruction. Diana's legacy was not only what William had lost, it was what he still had time to protect. That is why this story does not end with a 15-year-old boy behind a coffin. It ends with a father watching his own children and understanding that history does not have to repeat itself because the structure around them looks familiar. If Diana still means something to viewers, this is where that feeling should become action. Like this video, share it with someone who remembers those two boys walking through London. Subscribe if stories about Diana deserve more than a single anniversary headline. And in the comments write, "Let the brothers heal," if that is what Diana would have wanted most. Because the final question is not whether Diana predicted the future. She did not need to. She understood her sons. And perhaps the most painful part of the warning is that William only fully understood it after enough of the future had already happened. The next story goes closer to that week in 1997, because there was another sentence spoken to William before the funeral that changed whether he would walk at all. It came from Prince Philip, and the exact question he put to his 15-year-old grandson explains why Philip stepped into that procession himself. That detail changes the photograph everyone thinks they understand. And that is where the next video begins.